In 2017, I moved to a tiny rural town in Illinois. I didn't know anyone, except one friend. I was in my early 20s, quiet by nature, and completely out of place in a town where most people were already retired. Making friends felt impossible. So when my friend Clara introduced me to an older couple who needed a dog sitter, I agreed almost immediately. It felt like an opportunity. Money, connection, something. When I first visited their house, I noticed how wrong everything felt. The place was an old brick ranch from the 70s, worn down and barely holding together. That didn't bother me. I'd explored abandoned buildings for fun. The dogs were sweet and well-behaved. The couple, though, were unsettling. They were polite, but instead of making eye contact, they slowly scanned me from head to toe while I spoke. During the tour, they barely said a word, just opened doors, stood silently, then shut them again. No explanations, no warmth. They also ran a firearms business out of the house. That alone didn't scare me, but the cameras did. They were everywhere. Outside, inside, hallways, living room, kitchen, office, garage, backyard. Almost every angle of the house was covered. They said it was for insurance reasons. It made me uncomfortable, but I ignored it. A week later, they left for vacation, and I stayed to watch the dogs. I worked remotely and set up my laptop in their office. A monitor on the desk displayed live camera feeds from around the property. Honestly, that part made me feel safer. The house sat alone, backed up against thick woods, miles from anything. The first night passed quietly. The second night didn't. Around 10 p.m., I noticed the driveway camera went offline. Rural internet is unreliable, so I didn't panic, but I decided to check anyway. Before I reached the door, the dogs exploded into frantic barking and sprinted through the doggy door. They locked onto one exact spot along the fence where the woods began. I couldn't see anything, but my instincts were screaming. I managed to lure them back inside with treats and blocked the doggy door with a heavy chair, one that absolutely couldn't be moved easily. The next morning, I woke up late. The house was silent, too silent. The dogs weren't in bed with me. I found them outside in the yard. That's when I noticed the chair. It wasn't in front of the doggy door anymore. It had been shoved several feet away into the corner. My stomach dropped. There was no way the dogs moved it. I called Clara, panicked, and begged her to come over. We searched every room. Closets, garage, bathrooms. Nothing. No one. I forced myself to accept the explanation that maybe I'd misremembered. For the next 4 days, I lived on edge. Then came the fifth night. I sat down in the office and glanced at the camera monitor. Every single feed was black. All of them. Not one. All. I texted the couple to let them know. No response. Close to midnight, the dogs bolted upright again, scrambling and barking toward the yard. I grabbed a knife and checked outside. Nothing. The dogs stopped barking, and then I heard it. A thud from the back of the house. When I stepped closer, the air felt wrong. Heavy, like the silence itself was broken. I asked if anyone was there. No answer. I locked myself in the living room with the dogs. Then my phone buzzed. The wife texted, "Don't worry about the cameras. You're safe." I hadn't said I felt unsafe. Minutes later, "Can you check if the door from the garage to the house is open?" That door was in the back room. I didn't reply. Another message followed. "I can see you're awake. Please check." That's when it hit me. They still had access to the cameras. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. The garage door was open. As my phone screen lit the darkness, I saw it. The outline of an arm pressed flat against the wall beside the doorway. I ran. As I fled the house, the garage door began to rise. My headlights lit the space just long enough for me to see a grown man crouched behind a box. I drove straight to the police station. They found nothing. No intruder. No forced entry. 20 minutes later, the wife texted again. Plans changed. We're coming home. You can leave. As I drove away, a car without headlights pulled into their driveway. I warned her. She replied instantly. I know. They had been there the entire time. I'm 30 now. I survived, but I still think about how close I came to disappearing in that house, and how easily it could have happened without a trace. I work as a bartender at a busy bar and restaurant just outside Baltimore. The place has a strange setup. There are no servers. Everything runs through the bar. If you want food, water, or drinks, you order from us and pick it up yourself when it's ready. It's fast, chaotic, and loud most nights. Honestly, I like it that way. The bar is almost always packed. There's music blasting, people crowding near the DJ booth, and a steady flow of customers moving in and out. Most weekends, it's a younger crowd, college age, which usually means more dancing, more spills, and worse tips. That night started like any other. By mid-evening, the place was slammed. One group kept ordering tequila shots faster than I could cut limes. One guy was so drunk he used the same pickup line on me 3 times in a row. That's when I noticed them. An elderly couple walked in and sat down at the booth in the far corner of the restaurant. At first, nothing seemed strange, just out of place. This wasn't exactly a spot older couples usually chose on a loud weekend night. I didn't think much of it and went back to work. About 40 minutes later, I noticed them again. I was in the middle of pouring drinks, my hands moving automatically, when something felt wrong. The couple hadn't moved. Not once. No food. No drinks. I would have remembered serving them. Then I realized something worse. They weren't looking at each other. They were both staring at the wall beside their booth. Not talking. Not reacting. Just staring. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. Maybe they were waiting for someone. Maybe they didn't understand how the place worked and were waiting for a server. When things slowed down, I decided to check on them. I walked over, smiling politely. Neither of them turned to face me. I cleared my throat and asked if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't move at all. The man turned his head slowly, unnaturally slow. When I finally saw his face, a chill ran through me. His skin looked pale and worn, his eyes sunken deep into his face. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me and shook his head once. Something about that moment made my stomach twist. I muttered an awkward response and quickly walked back behind the bar. They didn't feel real. They looked like they belonged to another time, like they'd wandered in from somewhere they shouldn't exist anymore. I avoided looking at that booth for a long while. Later, when the crowd thinned, I glanced over again and nearly dropped the glass in my hand. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I locked eyes with the woman. She didn't blink, didn't look away. I turned back to my work, pretending to be busy, my heart racing. When I finally looked again, the booth was empty. They were gone. At closing time, I was still shaken. While wiping down the bar, I asked my coworker Karen if she'd noticed anything strange that night. She's a veteran bartender, proud of knowing everyone who walks through the door. When I mentioned the elderly couple, she looked confused. She said she didn't remember anyone like that. I laughed it off, but inside I was panicking. I pressed her again, describing where they sat. She crossed her arms and started listing customer after customer, what they ordered, what they wore. She was confident, certain. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. Then, as I walked to my car, I froze. Across the street, under a single streetlight, stood 2 dark figures. I knew it was them. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the parking lot without looking back. The drive home was a blur. I kept repeating the same words over and over, trying not to break down. I never saw them again. I never got answers. And I still don't know if they were ever really there, or why I was the only one who saw them. My name is Evan. I'm 28 years old, and not long after my divorce, I left everything behind and moved to a small town in Alabama called Chatham. I didn't really have many options. Other than my parents' place, the only roof I had was my grandfather's old house. He'd passed away a few years earlier and left it to our family. The house sat about 10 minutes outside town, isolated on roughly 10 acres of land, completely surrounded by woods. No nearby neighbors, no traffic, just trees in every direction. At the time, I thought the quiet would help me reset. The place itself was old, real old. Wooden floors that groaned with every step, doors that swelled and stuck in their frames. No matter how high I set the heat, the house always felt cold. But it was free, and I wasn't in a position to complain. The first few nights were uneventful. I unpacked, cleaned, and spent my evenings sitting on the porch with a beer, listening to the wind move through the trees. Sometimes an owl would call in the distance. It was calm, almost peaceful. That changed on the 7th night. I had just crawled into bed around midnight and was drifting off when I heard it, whistling. It was coming from outside, somewhere behind the house. It wasn't a melody I recognized, just a slow, uneven tune. Off-key, it sounded like someone walking through the woods, casually whistling as they moved. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but I brushed it off. I figured it was a hunter, or maybe some drunk wandering through the trees. The next night, it happened again. Same tune, same time, but this time, it sounded closer. I got out of bed, flipped on the porch light, and looked out the window. Nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the yard. No footprints, no movement, just the whistling fading farther into the woods. After that, I tried to ignore it. For several nights, I stayed in bed and forced myself to sleep through it. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Every night, it started around 1:15 a.m., sometimes 1:17, sometimes 1:19, always right around the same time. That's when the paranoia kicked in. I started wondering if someone knew I was alone out there, like they were doing it on purpose. A few days later, I called the sheriff's office. An older deputy, who I'll call Deputy H, came out. He'd been on the job for decades. When I explained what was happening, he went quiet. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He told me my grandfather used to call about the exact same thing. Someone whistling around the property late at night. Always in the spring. They'd never found anyone, and eventually they assumed my grandfather was just getting old. Now I was hearing it too. Deputy H told me to keep my doors locked and avoid going outside after dark. I took that advice seriously. I double-checked every window. One night, I even wedged chairs under the door handles. But the whistling kept creeping closer. One night, it came from behind the shed. Loud, close, like someone was standing just beyond the walls. I looked through the blinds, but didn't see anyone, and I didn't dare step outside. The next night, it came from the front porch. 3 long whistles, then silence. The night after that, it came from beneath the house. I swear it sounded like someone was in the crawl space, whistling upward through the vents. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I searched the attic and found a box of my grandfather's journals. Inside, he'd written about the whistling. He said it happened every spring for more than 10 years. He believed someone was watching the house. He even wrote that he used to sit by the front door with a rifle at night. It only ever happened after my grandmother died, when he was living alone. I called Deputy H again. He read the journals and looked genuinely unsettled. Before leaving, he warned me not to open the door for anyone I didn't recognize. That night, I stayed awake. I sat on the couch with a shotgun across my lap, one I barely knew how to use. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the whistling started again. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was coming from the hallway. I froze. The hallway light was off. The whistling moved closer, step by step. I stood, aimed the shotgun, and yelled, "Who's there?" The whistling stopped. I flipped on the hallway light. Nothing was there. After 2 quiet nights, I started to think it was over. On the 3rd night, I went to bed just after midnight, leaving the hallway light on. At 1:17 a.m., I woke up to knocking. 3 slow knocks. They came from inside the house, at the back door. Then silence. A moment later, floorboards creaked in the hallway. Someone was walking. The hallway light went out. I stepped into the darkness and saw a figure at the far end, wearing dark clothes, pale-faced, standing completely still. I raised the shotgun and screamed for them not to move. They turned like they were about to run, and then vanished down the hall. Heavy footsteps pounded out the front door. I ran outside and fired a shot into the darkness, screaming for them not to come back. Then I locked the house, jumped into my truck, and drove straight into town. I slept in the truck that night. The next morning, Deputy H returned. The front door was unlocked. Whoever it was had a key. Nothing was stolen. Nothing broken. Deputy H told me to change the locks, and off the record, he suggested I leave. He said someone out there hadn't taken kindly to my grandfather living in that house, or me. I changed the locks that day. Then I left the state. My father eventually sold the house. We took what mattered and left the rest behind. To this day, I don't know who that person was, how they got a key, or why they'd been watching that house for decades. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never live that far from people again.